So our next speaker is Eric Dumontel.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, hi. Would you like to share your screen?
Sure.
Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, very good. So we are almost 15 minutes behind schedule, so you have time to a 4:15. Okay. So our next speaker, the second speaker of this afternoon session is Eric Dumontel. So who's from so all these institutes. So Eric, over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. So I'm Eric Dumontel indeed, and I'm working at CEA at the Saclay Center of CEA. So my talk is not going to be about AMS, but it's going to be about neutron clustering, I'm going to present this phenomenon that has been a topic of concern in nuclear engineering the past years. To discuss that typical reactor physics problem, let's say, I will exploit an analogy with the gambler's room. So the outline of this talk is the following. First, I'll tell you why the nuclear industry uses Monte Carlo codes to simulate nuclear reactors and why these simulations are still challenging. Then I'll build the stochastic modeling of the neutron transport in reactors, leveraging on old and more recent, let's say, advances made on the study of branching Brownian motion, and show you a couple of unexpected or pathological behavior characteristic of these processes in the context of reactor physics, and I'll show you how they could be a concern for nuclear safety. And finally, I'll show you the results of some experiments that were led in 2017 to detect the neutron clustering. So let's switch to the context. Just a word to say that most of the content of this presentation has been published a couple of months ago in the Nature Communication Physics journal. So it's been made open source, so you can check it if you want to have more details, and specifically the developments and the demonstrations, they are relegated to the supplementary material section. Also, I'd like to mention quickly that this is the result of collaborative work between Los Alamos National Laboratories and the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in the US, together with IRSN. So IRSN is the French Technical Safety Officer in charge of nuclear safety in France, and CEA, which is the French main research organism on nuclear energy in France, among other areas of research. Concerning the numerical aspects first, so why should we care about Monte Carlo simulations of nuclear reactors, and what's the matter with them? So as you know, Monte Carlo neutron transport codes, they originate from the Second World War, and there's a closed intermixed history between Monte Carlo methods themselves developed in this context, and nuclear applications of fissions and also supercomputing. But I'm leaving this aside. Concerning the nuclear energy, Monte Carlo neutron transport codes so were designed originally for that, and also for military application. And they constitute in the frame of nuclear energy reference numerical scheme, because they don't do any, or let's say a lot of hypotheses. For example, you don't need to have a spatial or angular mesh to describe your problem. You don't do any hypothesis on the energies of the neutron, because the phase space is made of the three-dimensional space, the time, but also the direction and the energy. And for example, the codes that are used on a daily basis to operate power nuclear reactors, so this the industrial numerical scheme relies on a two group, so two group means two energy group, diffusion equation. So Monte Carlo code, they can go behind that. And so they are used as reference scheme to make sure that industrial scheme are working properly. And the final advantage of those codes is that they are extremely versatile. You can model complex geometries. So for this reason, they are used, almost only those codes are used for the design of Gen 4 reactors. But also they are used by nuclear safety authorities to validate and qualify all safety procedures whenever possible. So then you could ask yourself, what's the matter with Monte Carlo simulations? Indeed, the nuclear industry has been using them for more than a half century now. Plus the computing power seems to be on an everlasting growth, which advantages Monte Carlo methods. And I have to personally confess that I was surfing on this wave as for my career plane, but in fact, surprisingly, accessing to more computing resources has revealed many problems ranging from spatial tilts of the power distribution within nuclear reactors simulated by Monte Carlo codes, ranging from this to generational autocorrelation and to underestimation of uncertainties. For example, in this plot, oops, sorry, in this, no, I don't, so I'm gonna leave my my mouse, but on the top plot, you have the power distribution calculated by a Monte Carlo code within a 900 megawatt power pressurized water reactor. And if you cut the core in half and have a look at the power distribution, you project it onto an axis, z-axis, and this is the right top plot that you can see. Both, so you have more or less a cosine shape, but the left part and the right part, they seem to be tilted, and the core is symmetric, so it's a problem. Another problem that appeared is that when you calculate the standard deviation using the Monte Carlo codes, you have sometimes a strong underestimation of the uncertainties, and that's a problem. I mean, if at least it was an overestimation, we could have handled that, but an underestimation is a problem also for nuclear safety. So you have a problem. So to try to grasp and reproduce those problems in a simplified test case, I'm going to build here a toy model, rather realistic though, that is given here. So it's a fuel pin cell. So you have a cut view of it on the top image and an axial view of it on the bottom image. And this fuel pin cell has a variable length. So it can be 10 centimeters, which is unrealistic, or 1 meter, or 4 meters. So the real size in a reactor of a fuel pin cell is 4 meters. And you put reflective boundary condition everywhere. You simulate it with an industrial Monte Carlo code, like EEE4 in this case. And the medium is made of dioxide of uranium fuel enriched at 3.2% in uranium-5. You have a zirconium cladding and H water as a moderator. And you simulate that. And what happens if you have a look at the formal solution should be, in fact, a flat power distribution. So this is what you have for a 10 centimeter pin cell. If you have a look at the left plot, that gives you the neutron distribution along X for different generation number or for different time. You have the same plots. But if you go from this to a 1 meter pin cell, you can see that they are structured like an emergence of spatial structures. And if you simulate the 4 meter pin cell, then you can see that at a given time or in a given generation, all the neutrons, they have been accumulated in some spatial parts of the pin cell. And they form clusters that wander around like more or less erratically. So this is called neutron clustering. Let's move to the modeling of this phenomenon, which has been quite of a surprise for some neutron transport specialists, and me first. The first publication on the clustering affecting branching organisms were made in 72 and 85 by Dawson and Griffith, respectively in the field of theoretical ecology. So those guys are mathematicians. And years later, in 2001 and during the first decade, more generally, of 2000, in a Nature paper, Young observed strong spatial patterns developing among plankton colony that lives in the water column. So he built a stochastic modeling based on birth-death processes to reproduce what he called at the time, I think, Brownian bugs. So why using birth-death processes to model these? It's because planktons are organisms that reproduce, die, and that are transported more or less erratically or Brownianly in water. So this legitimates the use of the branching Brownian motion to describe the emergence of spatial patterns in a plankton's colony. So in the following, I will use this color code here, blue for reproduction, red for capture, and green for transport or diffusion. In an attempt to successively, let's say, simplify our neutron transport problem and to grasp the interesting phenomenology, the neutron transport code that was used to report the neutron clustering has been parameterized in such a way that it could exactly simulate a binary branching Brownian motion. By binary, I mean that each time the neutron induces a fission and is absorbed by the heavy nuclei, there is 1 chance over 2 that this fission ends up capturing the neutron, and 1 chance over 2 that the fission ends up by producing two outgoing neutrons. So in this case, if the typical size L of the geometry in which the neutrons are transported is way bigger than the typical distance over which the neutron travels before being captured, so we call that a decoupling of the process. Then you have a strong clustering effect that develops through time. For example, in this figure, the initial neutron population was distributed uniformly in the geometry, and at successive times, the neutrons, they gather more and more in packets, as you can see. So let's now move to the stochastic modeling of those spatial correlations. The model is the following. We have an initial number of neutrons n0 evolving in an infinite medium of size L in such a way that the concentration C0, which is equal to N0 divided by L, is kept constant when both quantity, I mean N0 and L, go to infinity. We do not care about the neutron energy, and we set the diffusion coefficient to D. So the neutrons, they undergo collisions at Poissonian times with rate lambda, and at each collision, they have k descendants with probability P of k. So the neutron capture probability is therefore given by P0, the scattering probability by P1, and the fission events by Pk with k bigger or equal than 2. So a few typical trajectories are given on the bottom left plot, where you can see the position versus time that are reported on the horizontal axis. So to model the fluctuation, we will first build a model in 0 dimension. And therefore, right now, we consider a cell with n individuals, n neutrons, let's say, at time t. So since the production rate and the capture rate are respectively lambda P2 and lambda P0, the probability to gain 1 neutron in dt or to lose 1 neutron in dt are given respectively with the W plus and W minus operator that you can see in the slide. Thus, we can write the forward master equation by stating the time derivative of the probability to have n neutrons at time t by stating that this derivative can be expressed as the sum of the probability to have n plus 1 neutron at time t and to lose 1 neutron, or to have n minus 1 neutron and to gain 1 neutron. And then you have to subtract the probabilities that you add n neutron exactly and that you either gain 1 or lose 1 neutron. So this is exactly the forward master equation written here. And then the mean number of neutrons and the second order moment that gives you the fluctuations, they can be extracted using their definition and lead to the expression that you can see in the red bubble. So in the case where you are exactly critical, meaning P0 equal P2, because you are having a look at a binary branching Brownian motion, the average number of neutrons stay constant, it's N0, and the variance, the fluctuations, they are growing linearly with time. So those are old results. Huh? As straightforward as this might sound, though, there's something really striking in these expressions. At least it was 3 centuries ago. So in a letter sent to Pierre de Fermat, Blaise Pascal was wondering what would happen after a long time if a fair game was played starting with a given amount of money. So this is called the gambler's rune. So the idea that the fluctuations are getting bigger and bigger, surely leading to the ruin of the player after some time. So this is what is now called the gambler's rune phenomenon. And it's quite surprising because the average amount of money stays constant as time goes by. And if you wait long enough, however, you almost surely get ruined. So that's there's something a little bit striking, let's say. But the point is that to compensate this ever-growing number of ruins, a fraction of players that gets smaller and smaller with time is becoming richer and richer. So this is what you can see on this top plot, starting with n equal 10. The bigger the time on the x-axis and the bigger the number of ruined players, and the smaller the number of rich players. But since the mean number n does not depend on time, because you are at criticality, or at, let's say it's a fair game, the richer are the remaining winners. And so the small fraction of a guy that becomes rich are getting richer and richer, in fact. So there's some kind of capitalistic principle into action there. And this gambler's rune principle can be straightly extended to reactor physics, where the neutrons replace the money, which lead to a few questions. Could a nuclear reactor shut down all alone, just like a rune player, because the equations are the same for the overall number of neutrons? Would it be possible to conceive such an experiment? And what about the proliferating trajectories? So this last question is tackled by this slide. Indeed, we just discussed the almost ruined encountered by our branching process, but since many values, since the mean value is preserved, the always growing ensemble of runes has to be compensated by an always smaller ensemble of diverging fortune. So let's try to imagine a casino seen from the top. So it's the bottom right image. You see a casino seen from the top with player seats organized according to a Cartesian mesh. The rune players leave an empty seat. And so these empty seats become more and more frequent as time goes by. And to compensate, a smaller and smaller fraction of players become richer and richer, as we said before. So that at the end of the day, you can see a spatial structure that is emerging with voids everywhere and in different places, overcrowded, let's say, big amount of money if you are calling, if you are using the game analogy, or many neutrons if you are talking about a reactor. So in the context of reactor, in fact, this is intuitively explained by the dissymmetry between depth of the neutron that can occur everywhere, and the production of neutrons that can only happen close to places where there are already neutrons. So the spatial view of our Gambler's rune problem can therefore be used, straightly to explain our neutron clustering phenomenon. However, what we have just done here is a fake two-dimensional problem built using independent zero-dimensional cells. So to improve this model, since the neutrons are subject to random displacement, we need to take transport phenomenon into account. And for this, we use diffusion. So we leave here the analogy with the gamblers in a casino. And now our cell is replaced by a vector n, so a spatial vector n, having n1 neutron in cell 1, n2 neutrons in cell 2, etc. You can see in this picture of the n vector. So the fission and capture operators W plus and W minus, they are the same than before, but they now act on the probability to have a vector n with one neutron added or removed in cell I. But the novelty is the addition of a migration event, so still in green for transport processes, that removes one neutron from cell I-1 and add this neutron in cell I to take into account the migration. So the master equation is exactly the same as before for capture and fission event, but we now need to add those migration events from cell I+1 to cell I, which final state is the vector n. And we also need to remove the migration event acting on a vector which initial state was the good one and which is modified by migration. So this is what is done in this forward master equation. And still the average number of neutrons in the cell K is also built like before, and we define the neutron concentration in X from it. And more importantly, for the topic that concerns us today, we can build the spatial correlation function using this definition and extract it from our master equation. So the spatial correlation function is called here the center correlation function, and you can see its definition. So more precisely, yeah, I've said that we can extract the correlation function from the forward equation. In fact, no, from the forward equation, we can extract an equation for the spatial correlation that is given here, which looks like a lot like a diffusion equation, but there's a supplementary delta term multiplied by nu2. So nu2 is the mean number of pairs of the fission process that is defined on the right side. And this equation, it happens that this equation can analytically be solved in dimension D for an infinite homogeneous medium. So here in this bottom right plot, we show the function in dimension 3, which behavior through space and time is reported in the plot, and you have the analytical expression given at the center of the slide. And we can see that the spatial correlation, they are getting bigger and bigger, and they saturate at some point. So at saturation, the amplitude of the correlation, they are given by this term lambda nu2 divided by the diffusion coefficient and divided by the average concentration of neutrons. So the bigger the number of neutrons, the concentration, the smaller will be those spatial correlations. And the bigger the number of pairs, the bigger will be this clustering phenomenon. So something else that was extremely striking for me is that in dimension 1 and 2, the spatial correlation functions, it grows unbounded. So this means that our system develops power peak at arbitrary places, in fact. So contrary to what I thought 10 years ago reading the textbook, one-dimensional reactor could not be stable. And at this point, there's something else that I wanted to mention. Yeah, the spatial correlation amplitude is controlled by the initial neutron concentration, as we've seen. In reactor, this concentration at nominal power is 10 to the 8 neutron per centimeter cube for a power reactor at 1,000 megawatts, while it is only 0.1 neutron per centimeter cube in the Monte Carlo simulation of this power reactor, meaning that there's a factor 10 to the 9 between reality and simulation in the statistics of neutron. So at the end of the day, the Monte Carlo simulation, they are way more prone to exhibit such behavior than power reactors. So it's not a problem for power reactor at full power, but it's a problem for the Monte Carlo codes that try to simulate them. Another area where you might have problems is power reactor at startup, because you don't have a lot of neutrons, and plus you have a decoupled system, or in a research reactor with zero power. So in fact, in this, let's say, all these surprises were linked to the fact that usually in nuclear engineering, people, they solve the so-called Boltzmann critical equation, giving the average neutron flux for birth-death processes with population control. So they can only have a look at results that are meaningful for average quantities. So this was the gold standard for reactor physics, this kind of code that reproduce very well real cases where the neutron density can be extremely high. And it was working so fine that it was up to the point that we almost forgot that branching gases might develop some peculiarities. And so to study these peculiarities, we resorted, in fact, what we have done here is we have resorted to the more general approach of Feynman-Katz path integral or Fokker-Planck type equation or master equation. We have used all those different approaches to model clustering and to have access to higher order moments and correlations. And so the surprise for us was that in some cases, the variance and the correlations, they might take the lead and become over mean statistics, which somewhere invalidate the result of an average quantity. So together with my colleague Andrea Zoya, and in the frame of different collaborations, we have studied many different aspects of neutron clustering, the effect of dimensionality, of transport versus diffusion, of boundary condition. We have taken into account the delay neutron that induce a very different dynamic. We have also studied population control and many different other points. I have provided you here with the different paper on all those topics. One point that might be worth mentioning, though, is the study of spatial correlation in presence or in the absence of population control. The population control is important in its ability to mimic the feedback reaction in power reactors that stabilize the, let's say, that make constant the number of neutrons. Or in the fact that it mimics the variance reduction technique that we played when using Monte Carlo criticality codes to force the number of neutrons to keep constant. So to put it in a nutshell, this is the bottom, let's say, diagram. While the absence of population control leads to the extension of the population in a finite domain, the population control leads to stable fluctuation. That's not surprising. Finally, the last part, together with colleagues from IRSN and Los Alamos, we decided to perform experiments in a real nuclear reactor to try to characterize fluctuations and spatial correlations. And this is the topic of this last section. And by the way, this photography with reactor on has been taken in 2017 at the reactor critical facility. So indeed, the modeling shows us that under certain conditions, the neutron clustering can be pregnant, can be more pregnant. So this is the case, for example, when the size of the system L is bigger than the distance traveled by the neutron before capture, that we call LM here. This is also the case when the number of neutron N is rather small. So those conditions, it happens that they are met in power reactors during startup, as I say, but also in research reactors. because in fact the power reactors they are not really available for experiment like that, but we can have access to research reactor. If the fuel is fresh, it means that the neutron concentration can be small. There are no a lot of spontaneous fission that can parasitate, let's say, the signal. And there are a couple of such reactors in the world, in fact. And the one that will be of interest for us is the Reactor Critical Facility called RCF, hosted by the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in the US. So obviously the measurement of spatial correlation, they can only be performed with an ad hoc instrumentation, but people from Los Alamos at the time, they offered us to build such a detection setup. So the experiment, they lasted a week and they took place in mid-2017 at the Reactor Critical Facility. So this reactor is equipped with 4.8% enriched dioxide of uranium ceramic fuel, as written here. It can be operated at low power between 1 milliwatt and 1 watt with a very small neutron concentration. The experimental setup that we built relied on an inner detection system made of 4 helium tubes, so the small helium tubes that you can see on the top right plot, and 4 of them were inserted in a fuel cell that was placed exactly at the center of the core. So you have a picture of the core in the middle of the slide, and with at the center this pin cell that was equipped with helium-3 tubes to detect the neutron. And it was also relying on an outer detection system made of 2 NOMAD detectors. So those NOMAD detectors are a patent of Los Alamos National Lab. They appear on the top left side of my slide. And we have put 2, one on top of the other, so that we had, at the end of the day, an instrumentation that was able to reconstruct the axial power inside and outside the core. And so we could build time correlation, spatial correlation, and everything. So it was complicated because, as you might know, the nuclear reactor are water reactor. So we had to fill the whole device with water, and so we had to made some waterproof cases for all those reactors, all those detection devices. Also, I'm going fast on these aspects, but you might know that before performing tests on a nuclear reactor, you have to demonstrate that your experimental protocol is safe and to design your experiment very precisely. So this requires to develop functionalities in the MORE-6 code, so the Monte Carlo code developed at IRSN, because usually people are only interested in average quantities, as we said this morning, and they do not care about simulating the real fission process. But here we really need to be able to have a look at fluctuations and correlation to sample over the proper generating function for the number of outgoing neutrons. So we had to make all those developments, and once they were done in MORE-6, it costed us weeks of simulation on an 8PC environment just to adjust the reactivity. So the reactivity is defined on the bottom right side of the slide. It's rho, and it needs to be equal to 0, this rho, so that we are exactly at criticality. So let's move to the results of this experiment. The first run was called the critical catastrophe run, as once the reactivity was adjusted, we let the reactor evolve by itself a few hours without any human intervention to see if the critical catastrophe might appear and if the core could shut down by itself. So we monitored the variance to mean ratio of the power, which is proportional to the number of neutrons, we believe that the time should behave as given in this equation linearly with time, as we've shown before. The left plot presents the variation of the power versus time for the experimental results in blue, and for the simulation results in red. And as you can see, the fluctuations seem to be bounded, therefore excluding the validity of our modeling. Also on this animation that you might see here, you can see that the power is delivered through neutron bursts, staying small most of the time and outgoing excursion from time to time. So these were experimental facts, and we had to somewhere modify our modeling to take them into account. So our hypothesis was that the spontaneous fissions coming from uranium 238 that emits neutron might have prevented the extension of the neutron population, because in fact you bring neutrons through time. It's like it's a constant source term that has to be added to the modeling. So therefore, we took back our demonstration and added this spontaneous fission terms that induces a transition written here, and which were characterized with a decay rate lambda SF for spontaneous fission. So I'm not presenting the developments, but once again, we were lucky to be able to obtain analytical results, both for the variance to mean ratio of the neutron population on the bottom left side, and for the spatial correlation function on the bottom right side, as you can see there. So I'm discussing those expressions now and the results. So this new formula for the variance to mean ratio, so we started with linear, with a fluctuation that should grow linearly with time. And now, as you can see, our expression show a bounded behavior. Indeed, the neutron number given by the power. So the blue plot on the right gives the power versus time, and it is bounded. And somewhere, in fact, you can imagine that the number of neutrons bounces between two limits. It cannot go to zero thanks to spontaneous neutron sources that somewhere keeps on triggering the chain reaction. But it cannot get too big for a subtle effect. It's because the core is exactly critical with the spontaneous sources. So it means that when the population goes high and is far bigger than the spontaneous source rate, the spontaneous source rate, the spontaneous source can be neglected, and so we are slightly under critical because we were critical with the sources, the spontaneous sources. So in fact, this explains that the power and the neutron number is bounded between two limits given by this equation, and this is precisely what we have observed. So the first conclusion is that there's no critical catastrophe. However, if you pay attention to the ratio, to the variance to mean ratio, you can see two things. At low power, it should be constant, which is what was measured. So in the right top plot, in blue, you have the measurement, and those measurements, they coincide with the simulation results in red and with the black line that is our theoretical modeling. And at high power, our model, so at high power, it means that we are at low reactivity. And so the variance to mean ratio should grow linearly versus the reactor power, not with time. It's bounded with time, but the bigger the reactor power, the smaller the reactivity and the bigger the fluctuation. And this is precisely what was observed on the bottom right plot, where you compare the simulation results with the model. So at the end of the day, we have a model that explains very well the observed and the simulated fluctuations, and everything seems to indicate that the fluctuations might very well develop in power reactors at low power, which opens safety-related questions. Why do I say that? It's because the automatic protection systems of power reactors, which are meant to shut down the core if the flux rises too fast, they use, in fact, measurement that is done from time to time in the reactor. And this measurement uses a time derivative of the flux. So see, if you have a too big noise affecting the flux, then it's hard to measure a derivative and to assess if there's an anormal rise of the flux in the reactor. Concerning the stochastic modeling with spontaneous fission sources, the resulting spatial correlation is given here. And it predicted a linear decay of the correlation versus the distance z over which the correlation are measured. So as you can see on the bottom left plot, the simulation results in red coincides precisely with the experimental results in blue, and with this simple model that we have built, so the fit given by the black curve, which is a fact that gives a lot of strength to the modeling. Also, the spatial correlation function tells us that the correlation, they should vanish as 1 over p, and this is precisely what was obtained in the experiment and in the simulation, as you can see on the top left plot here. So still the experimental results in blue, simulation results in red, and the stochastic modeling in black, and it's presented on the log-log scale. So all these results concerning spatial correlation, they might also reveal to be a safety concern for decoupled reactors, since the neutron clustering at the startup of the core might screen overreactive regions in the core that usually have to be detected the sooner possible at the startup of the reactor. And the one last slide before conclusion, one thing that I didn't mention exactly is that all these simulation results I presented here were obtained using the new dynamic and analog functionalities of the Monte Carlo transport codes that we discussed before, but we had to run this new kind of code for weeks in highly parallel computing resources, because we have simulated the real statistic of neutrons that we had in the reactor critical facility. So I think it was the first time that people were trying to simulate the full statistics of a real reactor, though here it's research reactors with almost zero power. So it's, let's say it's not that impressive. But to fix the idea, it seems that we had to simulate 10 to the 12 neutrons, which required 1 month of simulation with 1,000 processors. So since the results of both the experiments and these simulations were in perfect agreement, as you saw in the past slide, it allowed us to print the spatial distribution of neutrons within the reactor using the simulation. And there was a last surprise. So what you see here on the left plot is the result of this simulation with a standard detector resolution that integrates the signal over large time period. So this on this bottom left plot, we have a nice, smooth distribution, cosine distribution of the power, of the axial power. And this is what you can see if you project this power on the central plot with the very smooth cosine that you can see. But now, if you take a screenshot of your reactor operating, you have what is represented on the right side with a strong clustering effect affecting the neutron population. And when you project it on the axial axis, you can see that indeed most of your neutrons are in the upper part of the core. So to conclude, we have seen that in this Nature paper, let's say, presented the results of a few years of work, of collaborative work, and contained a couple of novelties that could be obtained thanks to the study of branching processes. In particular, it characterized the fluctuation and the spatial correlations of the neutrons in a nuclear reactor using, and it showed that we had an excellent agreement between both the stochastic modeling, the simulation results, and experimental results. We have seen that the fluctuation and the spatial correlation can be a safety concern, since on the side of the fluctuation, they might develop linearly with the power of the core, and automatic protection system, they need a stable signal. And on the side of spatial correlation, this effect might screen over reactive region at startup. So this might, for example, happen in a decoupled reactor at the startup phase because of the low neutron concentration and of the high dominance ratio of the core. So in the future, we would like to try to set up experiments to measure this spatial correlation versus the decoupling of the reactor. So thanks for your attention. If you have any question, I'd be glad to answer. And also I've provided you with a couple of publications of on the topic that we did in the frame of different collaborations.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the audience?
I've got a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So just back to Gambler's Ruin, right? Just one of the pictures you showed, the linear growth of the richer gamblers. So just an observation that this is perfectly, yeah.
Maybe, I think here, yeah.
Then next 2 slides along, I think from here.
After?
Yeah. So I think this is that one. This one demonstrates, I think, exactly what Emma was talking about this morning. So this linear growth is exactly this Yaglom thing. In effect, I think when you condition on survival, when you condition the system, it has a kind of linear evolution to it.
Yeah.
And in fact, I mean, that was the result, that the you scale by time t, and then condition on the system being alive at time t, you get the exponential distribution. So I think that's what your picture is showing there.
Sure.
The thing that I can't consolidate, so when you talked about the gamblers, you were trying to explain clustering on the bottom right corner there. You were saying, well, eventually the kind of the losers go home, and only the big winners are left at the table.
Yeah.
I mean, this has a little bit the flavor of this backbone decomposition, right? So
yeah.
you trim out all the stuff that leaves the domain, and look at the eternal genealogies. But okay, so a backbone decomposition says that you define an eternal event, an eternal notion of survival. You look for the genealogies that fulfill that. You strip off anything that doesn't belong to those genealogies, and what you have left is another branching process which has statistically biased behavior. But at the same time, I can't convince myself that that would explain your clustering, because if you have clustering in the original branching process, then you'll still have clustering in this backbone, because the backbone is just another branching process. It's statistically biased in the sense that the particles are told not to go out of the domain, but I'm not sure that that would accommodate for clustering. In fact, the particles of the backbone are very ergodic. They're very quickly, I think, converging to a kind of ergodic state that likes to see the whole domain. So I'm not sure I understand this clustering, where it comes from.
So essentially, it appears, for example, if you take the let's abandon this analogy with gamblers, but if you take a neutron population that is distributed over space, And if the neutrons, they don't move a lot, so what is going to happen is that when you have a look at a given cell of the space, I think that we can agree that you have at the beginning, so all your neutrons, they are uniformly distributed over space. And so if they don't move a lot, you take a cell, and in this cell, if you wait long enough, you won't have any neutrons anymore. And since they do not diffuse a lot, you have difficulties to put neutrons back in this cell. While all those void areas, all those void cells, because this is the reason. I mean, we are almost surely ruined, right? So most of the trajectories, they go to zero. So most of the cells, they go to zero. But to compensate it, there are some less and less frequent cells where you have a proliferation of neutrons. And if the neutrons, they travel a lot, then they somewhere they can repopulate all the void area, and clustering is disappearing. But if they don't move a lot, you have a clustering of the population, and you have a I mean, for example, in one dimension, the spatial correlation function grows unbounded. So that's I think it's essentially it's a dissymmetry between the fact that neutrons, they are captured everywhere, but they can only appear close to a parent, so close to somewhere where there are already neutrons. And this dissymmetry, if there are not a lot of migration, of diffusion, it gets bigger and bigger. And it depends on the, by the way, it's not a surprise that depending on the dimension of the space, you have more or less difficulties with a given diffusion coefficient to repopulate empty areas.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there is this business of support. I mean, you're talking about the support of the branching process. So the super process literature is a bit better in this respect than the particle process literature. I'm not sure, actually. I'm not sure. I was just having a discussion.
Well, but there is a 2011 paper by Lally and Zhang, where they consider critical branching random walks in 2 or higher dimensions, and they show that in a box of size n by n, well, the number of occupied sites is a proportion of 1 over log n. In 2 dimensions, and in 3 dimensions, it's different, and the critical dimension is 4. So all of this is has also been done for discrete particle models, and of course for super processes, exact gauge functions are known.
But but Pascal, I really think that's different, because scaling boxes are, you know, that's a completely different phenomena to what's happening here.
I'd be willing to bet on this.
You're scaling the system, the size of the system, as well as the number of particles, and that's not what they're observing here.
Actually, you don't need to. No, you don't need to scale the size of the system. I mean, you can just make a super branching random walk, and
that's the other thing that slightly worries me about that. Super processes are mass valued as well.
But Eric does a scale.
It's occupancy here, not mass. He's talking about, so everything carries mass 1.
But Eric does a scaling, because in the beginning he says that well, particles diffuse, right? So there is a diffusive scaling hidden there, right? Or at least a diffusive approximation. So I think this is enough evidence that there is you are allowed to do Brownian scaling.
not the size of the domain.
Most of the analytical results, they were obtained though for infinite domains. And,
no,
but
not necessarily.
I mean, the one that I've presented, I didn't mean, but in the literature, for example, with Andrea, we published a paper in Physical Review E for finite domains.
I mean, it's also known, for example, that a super Brownian motion, it will fizzle out. A critical one will just fizzle out to essentially a point, and the point is moving as a Brownian motion. However, again, it's the issue is that concerns me a little bit on just saying it's, you know, go and look in the literature and the answers are all there, is the mass as well, because Eric has mass 1 with everything, whereas super processors, you scale mass away. And so to have a positive mass, you need to have an infinite accumulation. In effect, there has to be an infinite accumulation of particles because each particle has mass 1 over n. So to see support, to see positive or kind of where the support of the positive mass is, you're really looking at an infinite concentration in some sense.
So as I said, all infinities can be made quantitative, right? And through gauge functions, and which then allows to make the link to discrete particle models. So I think that's not at all an issue.
Well, providing the approximation is, well, you know, it's
right, Andres, I don't want to interrupt, but just in case people want to have a little break before the next talk. So before people go, I'd like to invite everybody to unmute